My earliest memories carry the sting of being second best. Why can't you be more like your sister? Mom would sigh, watching me bury my nose in a book while Laura dazzled guests with her endless stories. I was 8, she was 6, and already the pattern was set. Emma, sweetheart, join the conversation, Dad would add, but his voice lacked warmth. Meanwhile, Laura would bask in their attention, curled up on his knee, making them laugh with her exaggerated expressions and ridiculous jokes. She was their star. I was just there. The favoritism wasn't just in words, it seeped into everything. When Laura decided she wanted to be a ballerina at 7, Mom rushed out and got her a brand new pink tutu and the best shoes money could buy. The following year, when I asked to join band class, she sighed about the budget and ordered me a secondhand flute from eBay. But the moment I truly understood where I stood in our family was Christmas when I was 12. I had been dropping hints for months about needing a laptop for school. Instead, I unwrapped a sweater and a couple of books. Laura, only 10, got an iPhone. She needs it to stay connected with her friends, Mom justified. I swallowed my disappointment, knowing there was no point in arguing. The only person who truly saw me was Grandma. Helen, my dad's mother. When my parents whisked Laura away on vacations, leaving me behind because it would be too expensive for all of us to go, Grandma took me in. They're leaving me behind again, I had murmured, watching them load up the car for yet another trip to Disney World. Grandma pulled me into a hug. They're lost, sweetheart. We'll have our own adventure. And we did. She taught me how to bake the perfect apple pie, told me stories of her childhood, and made me feel, for once, like I mattered. One night, when I was 15, I overheard my parents talking in the kitchen. I had come downstairs for water, exhausted from studying for my exams, when I heard my dad's voice. "We need to start thinking about college funds," he said. "We can only afford to send one of them," Mom replied, her voice casual, like she was deciding between brands of cereal. "Laura has so much potential in the performing arts. She could really make it." "What about Emma?" Dad asked, but there was no real concern in his tone. "She's smart," Mom dismissed. "She'll figure something out. Scholarships, maybe?" The glass in my hand nearly slipped as their words settled into my bones. That night, something inside me hardened. If they wouldn't invest in my future, I would. From that moment on, I threw myself into every academic opportunity I could find. Science fairs, debate club, math competitions, I did it all. While Laura went on dates and basked in her social life, I stayed up late, perfecting essays and studying for exams. "You're just jealous of your sister," Mom would say, whenever I pointed out Laura's reckless behavior. I stopped arguing. I clung to my academic medals and certificates like lifelines, whispering to myself that one day, I'd make it. One day, I'd be free of them. That day came when I graduated as valedictorian, earning a full-ride scholarship to a top business school. The morning my acceptance letter arrived, I rushed downstairs, excitement bubbling in my chest. "Mom! Dad! I got in! Full scholarship!" They barely looked up. Mom was helping Laura pick out an outfit for her latest date. "That's nice, dear," she said, distracted. It was the moment I realized I could cure cancer, and they'd still be more interested in Laura's love life. Packing up and moving to college was the best thing that ever happened to me. My roommate, Sasha, became the sister I'd always wanted. She celebrated my achievements, cheered me on, and never once made me feel like I was competing for her affection. The rare phone calls home always followed the same script. "Laura's dating the football team captain now." Mom would gush. "She's so popular. Everyone loves her. Are you seeing anyone, Emma?" "I'm focused on my studies," I'd mumble, eager to end the call. The truth? I was thriving. My professors praised my work ethic. I was making real friends, and for the first time in my life, I felt valued. Then, in my 3rd year, the bomb dropped. "Oh, by the way," Mom mentioned offhandedly during one of our infrequent calls, "Laura got accepted into Hillsworth University. We're so proud. We found her the cutest apartment near campus." "You should see the view. You're paying for it?" I asked, gripping my phone. "Of course. We don't want her stressing about money when she should be focusing on her studies." I sat in my tiny dorm room, blinking back tears of rage. The same parents who couldn't afford to help me were fully funding Laura's education at one of the most expensive universities in the country. I wanted to scream. Instead, I channeled the fury into determination. If they wouldn't invest in me, I'd show them I didn't need their help. And I did. By the time I graduated with honors, I had a job lined up at one of the top consulting firms in the city. 2 years later, I was promoted to senior consultant. I had built my own success without their help. I was done proving myself to them. Or so I thought. Success tasted sweeter when you built it yourself. For the first time in my life, I was in control. My job at the consulting firm wasn't just a paycheck, it was proof that I had made it without anyone's help. I had an apartment downtown, good friends, and a life that belonged entirely to me. But even when you think you've broken free, the past has a way of creeping back in. One evening, after a long day at work, my phone rang. I almost didn't answer when I saw Mom on the screen. But curiosity got the best of me. "Emma, sweetheart." Her voice was bright, forced. "How have you been? We haven't heard from you in ages." I leaned back against my kitchen counter, swirling the glass of wine in my hand. "I've been busy, Mom. Work's going great. That's wonderful, dear. Listen, we're having a little get-together next weekend. Just family. It would be so nice if you could come." I hesitated. I hadn't set foot in that house in years. The idea of sitting through another night of Laura-centered conversations made my stomach churn. "I don't know. Laura will be there," she interrupted. "She'd love to see you." "She's got big news to share." "Of course she did. Think about it, sweetheart," Mom added. "Your father and I would really love to see you." I should have said no, but some part of me, some stupid, hopeful part, wondered if maybe this time would be different. So, against my better judgment, I went. The moment I stepped through the front door, I knew I'd made a mistake. Nothing had changed. The house still smelled like Mom's lavender candles. Dad still greeted me with a distracted nod, barely looking up from his newspaper. And Laura, of course, was the center of attention, standing in the middle of the living room, soaking in the admiration of our relatives. "There she is," Laura beamed, striding over to me in a designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She hugged me, the scent of expensive perfume clinging to her. "Wow, Emma, it's been so long." "You look so professional." I ignored the subtle jab and forced a polite smile. "It's good to see you too, Laura. Oh, you're going to be so excited." She practically bounced on her heels. "I'm engaged." There it was, the big announcement. Gasps and cheers filled the room as she flashed a massive diamond ring. "To Richard Thompson, the third," she added, dragging out his name like it was supposed to impress me. I recognized the name. His family owned half the real estate in the city. He was old money, the kind of guy who grew up in country clubs and private schools. Mom clasped her hands together. "Isn't it wonderful? Laura is going to be Miss S. Thompson." "Oh, Emma, you must be so happy for your sister." "Happy? No. Numb? Absolutely. That's great," I said flatly. Laura leaned in, lowering her voice just enough for only me to hear. "I always knew I'd be the first one to get married. You were always so busy with work, but don't worry, sis. Maybe someday you'll find someone too." I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. It was the same tone she had used our entire childhood, the one that danced on the line between innocent and cruel. I wanted to leave, but I knew it would only fuel their narrative that I was the cold, bitter sister who couldn't be happy for her family. So, I stayed. I sat through the dinner, listening to endless wedding talk, nodding at the right moments, pretending I wasn't drowning in the familiar suffocation of being unseen. When the night finally ended, I walked to my car, ready to disappear back into my world. Then Laura called after me. "Emma, wait up!" I turned, exhaustion settling in my bones. "What is it, Laura?" She smiled, but there was something calculating behind it. "I have a favor to ask." I almost laughed. Of course she did. "What kind of favor?" "Well," she played with her ring. "Richard's family is really traditional. They love that I have a sister, and they think it's so cute, like something out of a movie. They'd love for you to be part of the wedding. Maybe even the maid of honor?" I blinked. "You want me to be your maid of honor?" "Yes." It would mean so much to Mom and Dad. And, to me. I stared at her, searching for some sign that she actually meant it. But deep down, I knew the truth. This wasn't about me. It never was. It was about the picture-perfect wedding she was trying to sell to Richard's family. The successful older sister standing proudly beside her, smiling for the cameras, playing her role. I should have said no. I should have walked away. But for some reason, standing there in the driveway, watching my parents beam at Laura, like she had just won the lottery, I caved. "Fine," I said. "I'll do it." Laura clapped her hands together, delighted. "Oh, Emma, I just knew you'd say yes. This is going to be perfect." She hugged me again, and I stood stiffly in her embrace, already regretting my decision. I drove home that night with a sinking feeling in my chest. I had spent my entire life trying to escape Laura's shadow, and somehow I had just agreed to stand in it once again. Agreeing to be Laura's maid of honor was a mistake. I knew it the second the words left my mouth. But once Laura had what she wanted, there was no turning back. Within a week, I was sucked into the whirlwind of wedding madness. Dress fittings, cake tastings, endless discussions about floral arrangements. My schedule, once filled with client meetings and project deadlines, was suddenly packed with bridal duties. "Emma, you have to come to the venue walkthrough," Laura insisted one evening over the phone. "Richard's family will be there, and I want everything to look perfect." I pinched the bridge of my nose, already regretting picking up her call. "Laura, I have a full-time job. I can't just drop everything for—" "Oh, come on," she whined. "It's one afternoon. Please?" It would mean so much to Mom and Dad. There it was again. The unspoken expectation. "Do this, or you'll disappoint them," I exhaled slowly. "Fine, I'll be there." The venue was ridiculous. A sprawling estate with marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and perfectly manicured gardens that screamed old money. The kind of place where people held charity galas and silent auctions. Laura was in her element, floating from table settings to catering menus like she was born for this. Meanwhile, the first stood in the background, watching as she turned her wedding into the most elaborate performance of her life. "Oh, Emma, come meet Richard's parents." Before I could protest, she dragged me toward an older couple who looked like they'd stepped straight out of a country club catalog. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, this is my sister, Emma." His mother, Victoria, I later learned, gave me a polite but disinterested smile. His father, Charles, barely acknowledged me. "Pleasure," Victoria said, already turning back to Laura. "Now, dear, we need to discuss the seating arrangements. We simply cannot have the Whitmores too close to the McAllisters. There's still tension over that unfortunate polo match." I tuned out the rest, realizing exactly where I ranked in this social hierarchy. Invisible. Laura, of course, was thriving. A few weeks later, the bachelorette party happened. I should have known it would be a disaster. Laura insisted on a weekend getaway at a luxury resort, complete with spa treatments, yacht rides, and a guest list full of her picture-perfect friends. The moment I arrived, I felt out of place. "Emma!" Laura squealed, running up to me in a glittering dress that probably cost as much as my rent. "You finally made it." The girls around her were exactly what I expected, polished, flawless, dripping in designer labels. "Wow, one of them Brianna?" "Brittany," murmured, looking me up and down. "You're the sister? You two are really different." I forced a smile, already regretting the whole thing. "Yeah, we are." Laura linked arms with me. "But that's what makes us so close." I nearly choked on my drink. "Close? Since when?" The night dragged on. Laura basked in the attention, while I played the role of the supportive older sister. The responsible one. The boring one. By the time we ended up at a VIP club, I was done. "Laura, I'm heading out," I called over the music. "What?" She spun around, pouting. "No, you have to stay. We're just getting started." "Yeah, well, some of us have work in the morning," I shot back. She sighed dramatically. "Fine. But you're missing all the fun." I wasn't. As I stepped outside, I took a deep breath, letting the night air cool my frustration. I had done my part. I had shown up, played along, and smiled through gritted teeth. And yet, I had the sinking feeling that this wasn't even close to being over. The weeks leading up to the wedding blurred together. Laura continued parading me around like a prop in her perfect fairy tale. "Oh, Emma, you have to wear your hair up. It looks so much softer that way. Emma, maybe try this shade of lipstick." Something less corporate. Emma, can you please talk to Richard's cousin at the reception? He's single, and I really think you two would hit it off. I swallowed my annoyance and went along with it. Not because I wanted to, but because it was easier. But then came the dress fitting. Laura and her bridesmaids were already there when I arrived, sipping champagne and gushing over their gowns. The moment I saw my dress, my stomach dropped. It was pale pink, not a soft, elegant blush. No, it was bubblegum pink, ruffled, and hideous. What do you think? Laura asked, beaming. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. You're joking. Her smile faltered. What? This dress. It's a joke, right? She crossed her arms. Emma, it's cute, and it'll make you stand out. Everyone will know you're the maid of honor. I bit back the urge to laugh. Oh, they'd know, all right. They'd know I looked like a walking birthday cake. No, I said, shaking my head. I'm not wearing this. Laura's eyes darkened. Emma, don't be difficult. Difficult? I scoffed. Laura, I have let you dictate every single detail of this wedding. But this is humiliating, she huffed, arms crossed. Fine, you can pick something you like, but don't ruin my aesthetic. I grabbed the first neutral dress I saw, paid for it myself, and walked out. I was done playing her game. The night before the wedding, my parents hosted a rehearsal dinner. It was exactly what I expected, an endless stream of compliments thrown at Laura while I sat there, forgotten. Near the end of the night, Laura pulled me aside. Emma, she started, her voice sugar-sweet, tomorrow is really important to me. I need you to be supportive, okay? I raised an eyebrow. Supportive? She nodded. Yes. No side comments? No. Attitude. Just smile and be there for me. I stared at her, trying to decide if she actually believed the nonsense coming out of her mouth. Then I smiled. Of course, Laura, she sighed in relief. Thank you. I knew I could count on you. And with that, she walked off, completely unaware of the storm brewing beneath my carefully controlled expression. I had been quiet my whole life. But tomorrow I was done being silent. The morning of Laura's wedding was as chaotic as expected. Hairdressers, makeup artists, and photographers flooded the bridal suite, all fussing over her. She soaked it in, twirling in her designer gown, making sure everyone knew she was the star. I sat in the corner, sipping my coffee, counting down the hours until I could leave. Emma, don't just sit there, Mom scolded. Help your sister. I bit my tongue. I'd helped plenty, but of course that wasn't enough. Nothing ever was. By the time we arrived at the venue, the guests were already seated. Laura took a deep breath, adjusting her veil, flashing a dazzling smile. This is it, she sighed. The most important day of my life. I watched as our parents fawned over her, fixing every tiny detail, telling her how beautiful she looked. Not once did they look at me. Not once did they acknowledge I was standing right there. But I expected that. What I didn't expect was what came next. 15 minutes before the ceremony, I went looking for my clutch. I had left it in one of the back rooms, away from the chaos. As I reached the door, I heard voices inside. Familiar voices. My stomach turned as I realized who they belonged to. Laura and James. I froze. My brain struggled to process it. James, my ex-fiancé. The man I had caught in bed with my sister 3 years ago. The man who had shattered my trust in ways I still hadn't fully recovered from. I pressed myself against the doorframe, straining to hear. Laura, James whispered, you don't have to do this. A pause. Then her voice, lower than usual. James, stop. You still have time, he insisted. We belong together. You know that. A cold chill ran down my spine. I pushed the door open. Laura gasped, stepping back. Emma! James turned, eyes widening. This isn't Save It. My voice was sharp, cutting through the air like a blade. Laura's face turned red. This is not what it looks like. I let out a bitter laugh. Really? Because it looks exactly like what you did to me. James opened his mouth, but I didn't give him the chance. Get out, I snapped. He hesitated, looking at Laura as if she would save him. When she said nothing, he sighed and slipped past me, disappearing down the hallway. I turned to Laura, my heart pounding. Are you serious? The morning of your wedding? With him? Her jaw tightened. It was just a moment. A moment? I scoffed. You destroyed my relationship for what? A fling? And now you're doing it again? She crossed her arms. You don't understand. Then make me understand. She hesitated. Then, in a voice so small I barely recognized it, she whispered, I don't love Richard. I stared at her. I mean, he's great on paper, she continued quickly. We look good together, our families match, and he gives me everything I could ever want. But I don't love him. Then why are you marrying him? She exhaled sharply. Because I have to. Because I can't ruin this. Because if I leave him, I have nothing. I shook my head. That's why you're doing this? She looked away. For the first time, I saw the cracks in her perfect facade. The desperation in her eyes. The fear. And despite everything, despite the years of hurt, the betrayal, the resentment, I almost felt bad for her. Almost. But then she ruined it. You can't tell anyone, she whispered. I blinked. Excuse me? If you care about this family at all, you'll keep this between us. I laughed. A real, genuine laugh. Unbelievable. Emma, please, she begged. If Richard finds out, that's not my problem. She grabbed my wrist. If you do this, you'll be ruining my life. I yanked my arm free. You ruined mine first. I walked straight out of that room and into the reception hall, my mind racing. The guests were already seated. Richard stood at the altar, looking calm, oblivious. My parents beamed with pride. I spotted the microphone near the podium, and suddenly, everything became crystal clear. I made my way to the front, picked up the mic, and tapped it twice. The room quieted. Good afternoon, everyone, I said, my voice steady. All eyes turned to me. I know we're all here to celebrate Laura and Richard's big day, I continued. But before that happens, I think there's something you all should know. I turned to Richard, meeting his confused gaze. Your fiancé was just in the back room, I said, my voice ringing through the venue. With my ex-fiancé, James, gasps, whispers, stunned silence. I turned to Laura. Her face was pale, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. I looked back at Richard. She doesn't love you. She's marrying you for your money. And just now, she was this close to running off with someone else. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stared at her. And then, without a word, he walked off. The room exploded. My mother shrieked my name. Guests whispered furiously. Laura? She burst into tears, but I didn't stay to watch. I placed the microphone down, turned on my heel, and walked out of that wedding with my head held high. For the first time in my life, I didn't care about the consequences. I was done being silent. I walked out of that wedding with my head high, but the moment I stepped outside, the weight of what I'd done hit me. I had just burned every bridge with my family. My phone buzzed furiously in my hand. One call after another from Mom, then Dad, then an unknown number I assumed was Richard. I ignored them all. I wasn't ready to hear their voices, to listen to whatever desperate excuses or furious accusations they were about to throw my way. Instead, I got in my car, took a deep breath, and drove. By the time I reached my apartment, my hands had stopped shaking, but my mind hadn't settled. Had I done the right thing? I knew the answer. Yes. Laura had spent her whole life getting away with everything. She had ruined relationships, manipulated our parents, and expected the world to clean up her messes. I had spent years watching it happen, being told to stay quiet, to be the bigger person. Not anymore. My phone buzzed again. This time, a text from Sasha. Sasha, I heard what happened. Are you okay? I stared at the screen, exhaling slowly. Me, I think so. A few seconds later, my phone rang. Sasha. I picked up. Hey, girl. Her voice was a mix of shock and pride. You really did that. I let out a short laugh. Yeah, I did. Tell me everything. So I did. I told her about hearing Laura and James, about her desperate confession, about the moment I picked up that microphone and shattered the illusion she had spent years building. When I finished, Sasha let out a long whistle. Damn, that is some red wedding level drama, I groaned. Don't say that. I don't want to be a villain. Emma, you're not the villain, she said firmly. You just finally stood up for yourself. And honestly, it was overdue. I swallowed. suddenly feeling the sting of unshed tears. Yeah, maybe, she sighed. Are you going to be okay? I glanced around my apartment, at the life I had built away from them. Yes, I said, and for the first time, I truly meant it. The aftermath hit fast. The next morning, I woke up to over a dozen missed calls. Mom, Dad, Laura. Unknown numbers. I ignored them all. Then, as I was making coffee, a text popped up from an unknown number. Unknown, I need to talk to you. I frowned. Me, who is this? Unknown, Richard. The first nearly dropped my phone. Of all the people I expected to reach out, he wasn't one of them. After a long pause, I finally replied. Me, why? Richard, because I need to hear the truth. I hesitated. Then, before I could overthink it, I sent him my favorite coffee shop's address and a time. Richard looked different, less polished, more human. His suit was gone, replaced by a plain sweater and jeans. Dark circles hung under his eyes, like he hadn't slept at all. I sat across from him, unsure where to start. He beat me to it. So, he said quietly. Was it all a lie? I studied him. That depends on what you mean, he exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Did she ever love me? I hesitated, then shook my head. Not the way you deserved. Pain flickered across his face. He nodded slowly, staring down at his untouched coffee. I should have known, he muttered. The signs were there. She was always distant. More in love with the idea of us than with me. I stayed quiet, letting him process. After a moment, he looked at me. And James? Anger coiled in my stomach at the mention of his name. She cheated on you with him, I said bluntly. And not for the first time. Richard let out a bitter laugh. Wow. Silence stretched between us before he spoke again. You did the right thing, he said, telling me. I blinked. You think so? He nodded. If we had gotten married, it would have been a disaster. A beat passed before he gave me a small, tired smile. So, thanks for saving me from a divorce lawyer 5 years from now. I let out a quiet laugh. Anytime. Richard leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. I can't believe I almost married her. I thought about all the years I had wasted trying to earn my parents' love, about all the times I had convinced myself Laura would change. I can, I said softly. Richard gave me a knowing look, then lifted his cup in a mock toast. To dodging bullets. I clinked my cup against his. To new beginnings. And for the first time in years, I felt free. That night, the real storm hit. Laura. She called 3 times before I finally answered. The moment I picked up, her voice exploded through the phone. How could you do this to me? I pulled the phone away from my ear. Hello to you too, Laura. She was furious. You ruined my life, Emma. I rolled my eyes. I told the truth. You humiliated me in front of everyone. Richard left me. His family is furious. Do you even realize what you've done? I took a slow breath. Laura, you did this. You were the one sneaking around with James. You were the one lying to Richard. All I did was bring the truth into the light. She scoffed. Oh, please, you've always been jealous of me. You hated that I was getting married first. I laughed, genuinely amused. Laura, the first couldn't care less about your wedding. What I care about is the fact that you never face consequences for anything. Until now. She was silent for a moment. Then, in a much smaller voice, she whispered, Mom and Dad aren't speaking to me. That caught me off guard. What? They're furious, she admitted. Dad won't even look at me. Mom keeps crying. They're embarrassed, Emma. They don't even want me staying with them. I didn't know what to say to that. For the first time in our lives, Laura was finally feeling what it was like to be on the other side. Wow, I muttered. Her voice hardened again. Are you happy now? I thought about it, and then I smiled. Yes, I said simply. And with that, I hung up. For the first time, Laura was left alone to clean up her own mess. And I was finally free. I woke up the next morning to a strange feeling. Peace. For the first time in my life, I wasn't carrying the weight of my family's expectations. I wasn't living in Laura's shadow. I wasn't chasing their approval. I was free. My phone sat on the nightstand, silent for the first time in days. No more missed calls. No more frantic texts. No more guilt-tripping voicemails. I stretched, took a deep breath, and smiled. Let them deal with their own mess. A week passed before I heard anything about Laura. Sasha, as usual, had the updates. Okay, so guess what I just found out? She said, practically buzzing through the phone. I laughed. Do I even want to know? Oh, you do. She took a dramatic pause. Laura moved back in with your parents. I almost dropped my coffee. You're kidding. Nope. She's back in her childhood bedroom, living off their retirement fund. And she lost her apartment because Richard stopped paying for it. I blinked. Wow. Yup. It gets better. She lowered her voice, even though no one else was around. Apparently, Richard's family is suing her for fraud. Something about misrepresenting herself before the wedding. And your parents? Humiliated. They won't even show their faces at country club events. I shook my head, stunned. So, let me get this straight, Laura, the golden child, the one who had everything handed to her, is now jobless, single, and living with mom and dad? Sasha snorted. Life comes at you fast. I wasn't sure how I felt about it. A part of me, the part that had spent years being overlooked, dismissed, treated like a backup plan, wanted to revel in it. Wanted to enjoy the fact that Laura was finally facing the consequences of her own actions. But another part of me just didn't care anymore. I had moved on, and honestly, that was the best revenge. A month later, I ran into Richard again. I was grabbing groceries when I spotted him near the produce section, staring at a bag of oranges like it held the secrets of the universe. I hesitated, wondering if I should say anything. Before I could decide, he looked up. Our eyes met. For a second, there was silence. Then, to my surprise, he smiled. Emma. Richard. I nodded at the oranges. You okay? You look like you're having a deep moment with that fruit. He let out a short laugh. Just thinking. He put the bag down. How have you been? Good, I said. And for the first time in a long time, I truly meant it. And you? He exhaled. Getting there. We stood there for a moment, surrounded by the hum of grocery store chatter. Listen, he said finally. I never really got to thank you. I raised an eyebrow. For what? For saving me from a terrible marriage, he said simply. I mean, it sucked at the time, but looking back, you did me a favor. I smiled. Well, I do have a habit of exposing liars at weddings. It's kind of my thing now. He laughed. Noted. There was another pause, then he cleared his throat. Would you maybe want to grab a coffee sometime? I blinked. Like, a date? He chuckled. Or just two people catching up? He shrugged. No pressure. I thought about it. Then I smiled. Yeah, I'd like that. That night, I sat on my balcony, sipping wine and watching the city lights. So much had changed. I had spent most of my life fighting to be seen, fighting to be enough. But I didn't need their validation anymore. I had my own life, my own happiness. And for the first time, I wasn't chasing anyone's approval. I was just me. And that was more than enough. Story 2. In a few weeks, my 27-year-old self, Natalie, will tie the knot. A wave of wedding invites is currently around me as I sit at my kitchen table. I look over the names to make sure I haven't overlooked someone significant. However, I purposefully omitted one name from the list. My stepmother's. I understand your thoughts. I was getting married, and how could I not invite my stepmother? It's a lengthy tale, and I suppose now is as good a time as any to share it. I was 5 years old when it all began. When my parents divorced, my entire world fell apart. They informed me that I would alternate between living with each of them. I thought it was fantastic at the time. I couldn't decide between my parents since I loved them both. I didn't have to in this way. At first, life following the divorce wasn't too horrible. My dad and I used to go these incredible road trips together. When it was his turn to have me, he could take time off because he ran his own company. We would get into his car and drive around the city. I recall having my dad by my side while I explored new locations, feeling like a small adventurer. Things were different, but no less enjoyable while I was with my mother. The scent of freshly made cookies frequently permeated the home while we spent hours playing with my dolls and creating stories for each one. Those were good times. Both of my parents made me feel valued, loved, and wanted. Then, however, a shift occurred. When I was 7 years old, my dad remarried. I recall the day he presented Sarah to me. "I'll be a stepmother soon." Her grin seemed to light up the room, and she had beautiful golden hair. Things were okay at first. Sarah treated me well and showed real concern. When I was at my dad's place, she would assist me with my homework and even show me how to braid my hair. However, as time passed, something changed. Despite her inability to conceive, Sarah desired to have her own children. Although I didn't comprehend it at the time, I can now see how it impacted her. Sarah's perspective on me completely changed. Where she had formerly been hospitable and nice, she now seemed to dislike me for being here. She seemed to despise me for being born before she was able to conceive. At the time, I didn't comprehend it. As a little child, I wondered what I had done wrong to suddenly cause my stepmother to despise me so profoundly. Sarah's attitude toward me only worse with time. It seemed as though she had decided she couldn't have children of her own. There would be no place for me in her self-centered life. After returning from my mom's, I began to notice changes. While I was away, Dad and Sarah would be lounging and tanned, telling me about their travels. I eventually lost the ability to contain myself. "Why don't we travel like we used to, Dad?" Before responding, he glanced at Sarah and appeared uneasy. "Well, my dear, things have changed. We must take Sarah's schedule into account." Her voice was sharply cut. "You're old enough, Natalie, to know that grown-ups require their own space. Avoid becoming self-centered." It seemed as if someone had hit me. My desire to spend time with my own father is selfish. It was more than simply the travels, though. Everything changed while I was at my father's place. My new restrictions from Sarah seemed to be all about keeping me out of sight and out of mind. "Natalie," she would say. She spoke in a falsely lovely voice. "Go play in your room, please." Adults are conversing. I initially attempted to argue. "However, I'd want to be out here with you and your father." Sarah would narrow her eyes. "I need some peaceful time with your father. Is that asking for too much?" Feeling more like a prisoner than a daughter in my own father's home, I would withdraw to my room. The list of things not to do was becoming larger every day. Avoid making noise. Avoid talking too loudly. Avoid engaging in active games. Refrain from laughing aloud. Living there felt like being in a library. Worse, though. I was in the living room one afternoon, laughing at a humorous television program. Sarah barged in, her face flushed. "I told you to be quiet." "But what?" She lost her temper. However, I was merely giggling. She interrupted me. "What you were laughing at doesn't matter to me. My rules are followed in this house. You get it?" I gave a nod, refusing to cry. "Indeed, Sarah. Good," she murmured as she turned to go. "After this, retire to your room and remain there till supper." Dad didn't appear to notice. Perhaps he simply did not want to see it. Every time I attempted to discuss with him how Sarah was treating me, he would dismiss it. "She's simply adapting, Natalie," he'd say. "Give her time." The time didn't make things better. It simply made Sarah more outspoken in her contempt of me. She'd critique everything I did, from how I dressed to how I ate. "Honestly, Natalie, can't you sit up straight and chew with your mouth closed? It's like you were reared in a barn." I wanted to shout, to tell her that I was just a kid, but I was trying my best. But I knew it wouldn't make a difference. My very presence was a transgression in Sarah's eyes. I so learnt to minimize myself, to keep silent, to avoid getting in the way. In my father's home, I turned into a ghost. Every 2 weeks, I tiptoe about, terrified to make noise or attract attention. I felt like I could breathe again when it came time to return to Mom's. But I was always afraid of going back to my dad's house and seeing Sarah's harsh remarks and icy glances. For years, I was able to suppress my feelings, but by the time I was 12, I was at my breaking point. One day, following a particularly unpleasant interaction with Sarah, I lost it and told my mother everything. With each phrase, Mom's expression darkened as she listened. She blew up when I was done. "That thing?" I jumped when she shouted. "How could she possibly treat my kid in such a manner?" Mom was talking to Dad on the phone before I could stop her. She's never sounded so irate to me. She growled into the phone. "Listen, you fucking jerk of a father. I'll take you to court and make sure you never see Natalie again if you can't manage your wife." I was ill. This was not my preference. all I wanted was for things to improve rather than worsen. When I returned to my father's place a few days later, he sat me down for a serious conversation. "Natalie," he said in a firm tone, "we must talk about your actions. Sarah has been excellent to you. You only whine while she does her best to be a decent stepmother." What I was hearing was unbelievable. But Dad, enough. He lost his temper. "Are you aware of your actions? My visiting privileges are in danger of being taken away by your mother. Would you like that? Would you prefer not to see me ever again?" My eyes filled with tears. "No, of course not." Dad's voice grew softer. "Then, Natalie, you have to stop this. No more griping about Sarah. She simply has your best interests in mind. You will ultimately destroy this family if you continue in this manner. Do you want it that way?" As he walked out of the room, I shook my head, unable to speak above my emotions. My world seemed to have fallen apart. Dad had not only not trusted me, but he had also made me feel like I was to blame for everything. Sarah wasn't the issue, I was. That was the last time I grumbled. To avoid losing my dad, I made the decision to be the ideal stepdaughter and comply with all of Sarah's requests. Quiet and submissive, I turned into a shadow in the house. Nothing was up to me. However, I was still able to see my father, even though every day he appeared to be a stranger. Things were different at Mom's place. Mom met Robert a few years after her divorce from Dad. In addition to being hilarious and compassionate, he had a daughter named Lily who was a year younger than me. I eventually developed feelings for each of them. My dad was always there for me, but Robert never sought to take his place. He would listen to my issues, assist me with my homework, and even teach me how to ride a bike, something my dad had never been able to do because he was too busy. I never realized I wanted a sibling until I met Lily. We would laugh and share secrets while staying up late. I never felt alienated around her. The difference between my two households became more pronounced as I grew older. I was a ghost at Dad's, attempting to maintain the delicate equilibrium. I was Natalie at Mom's, loud, witty, and adored. Naturally, my requirements increased as I approached adolescence. I wanted the newest technology, a stylish smartphone, and a good laptop for homework, just like any other child my age. To his credit, Dad seems to comprehend this. He had always been giving, so when I first needed anything, he bought it for me without hesitation. My happiness was fleeting, but I do recall the day he gave me my first smartphone. It was all in Sarah's grimace of disapproval. I heard them arguing later that evening. Sarah snarled, "You're spoiling her, Tom. Are you aware of the cost of that phone? For school, she needs it." Dad made a feeble defense. Sarah laughed. "Please. She needs it in order to spend time on social media and upload selfies. You're wasting your money." From that day on, Sarah declared herself the protector of the family's finances. When it came to my costs, she promised to help Dad save money. In actuality, this meant that the next time I needed new clothes, she would be in charge of everything I received. Sarah was adamant about doing it herself. A procession of used clothing and footwear, all purchased from clearance shops or bargain websites, ensued. Please understand that I have nothing against used items, but Sarah went too far. The majority of the time, the clothing was either uncomfortable or ill-fitting. I didn't dare to complain, though. Dad's admonition about destroying the family is still fresh in my mind. The whole thing is ironic. Sarah never cut corners when it came to herself, but I had to wear hand-me-downs. Her closet was a living example of a fashion magazine, clothing from the newest collections, branded luggage, and designer shoes. She would spend hours altering her exquisitely matched ensembles while preening in front of the mirror. When I graduated from high school, everything reached a breaking point. My father had assured me of an automobile, just something to get me around, nothing spectacular. I was ecstatic. At last, evidence that he was still concerned, that in his new life, he considered me more than a bother. As usual, though, Sarah was unable to allow it to occur. Everything went haywire the night before we were scheduled to go automobile shopping. "A car," said Sarah. "Tom, are you mentally ill? We are unable to pay for it. In addition, I need a new vehicle. It's nearly 3 years old." Every statement made my heart sink as I listened from my chamber. I was aware of the outcome. Dad came to me with same expression on his face the following morning, as it turned out. The one who stated he was going to let me down once again. He said, "Natalie, honey," without looking at me in relation to the automobile. I spared him the bother. "I understand, Dad, it's all right." Surely we can't afford it. The fact that he didn't have to say it himself seems to ease him. Correct? "I will, however, cover the cost of any college you like to attend, as well as your lodging." What does it sound like? I made an effort to grin. "Sounds fantastic, Dad. Regards." I heard Sarah's voice coming from below as he exited my room. "When are we going to have a look at that new Jeep, Tom?" I desired. So I sat in my room, surrounded by clothes that didn't fit, holding my old phone, and daydreaming about a car that would never come. And I came to a realization. It was not the tangible items that caused the most pain. They stood for it. Every rejected request, every used shirt. "You're not worth it." And every broken promise was just another way of stating that. Natalie. I put a lot of effort into researching the top colleges when it came time to make my decision. At last, I came upon one that appeared ideal. Fantastic program. Lovely campus. Not too far from home, anyway. When I was approved, I was overjoyed, but Sarah's reaction to the tuition costs was disastrous. "Do you mean me?" Her face flushed as she screamed. "Highway robbery is what this is." Dad made an effort to soothe her. "We did promise Natalie, Sarah." Sarah virtually foamed at the mouth. "I don't care what we promise. For 4 years, we won't be spending this much on her parties." She hurried away and came back with a few pamphlets. She shoved them at Dad here. "These universities are farther away and significantly more affordable. She will get some freedom from it." Suddenly, my hopes were dashed once more. I ended up attending the college that Sarah had selected. Less expensive? Yes, but it was also a long way from everyone and everything I knew. When Mom and Robert learned that I was attending college, they were overjoyed. They were unaware of the drama that went on behind the scenes, and I lacked the courage to tell them. Why should I bother them with my issues? I put myself into my academics in spite of everything. Despite the fact that this chance wasn't precisely what I had hoped for, I was eager to take advantage of it. During the holidays, I would return home and spend time at both my dad's and Mom's welcome homes. Dad's place, that is. Everything ultimately came to a head during one of these pauses. To my astonishment, my dad called to invite me to Sarah's birthday celebration. He responded, "Sarah would love to see you, but I could tell he wasn't sure." A tiny part of me hoped that perhaps, just possibly, things were changing despite my skepticism. I thus concurred. I even saved money from my part-time work at college to buy Sarah a lovely scarf as a gift. As I got to the residence, the celebration was going strong. I inhaled deeply before walking up to Sarah with my present. I forced a grin and replied, "Happy birthday, Sarah. I hope you enjoy it." I was never able to complete. Anger twisted Sarah's face. "Why are you here?" She gave a hiss, loud enough for guests in the vicinity to hear. Confused, I stumbled. "Dad, though, indicated you wanted me to go. Leave," she cried. "This is not a place for you. You have no right to interrupt my celebration by showing up." I was stunned and just stood there. There was silence in the room. Everyone is watching us. Sarah grabbed the gift out of my hands and threw it in a nearby garbage bin without even glancing at it. "You have nothing to offer me. You don't deserve to be among my pals here. Go now." I turned and ran, tears stinging my eyes. I grabbed the few things I had left in my previous room and raced up to it. Throughout the years, I heard Sarah laughing as I made my way to the front door, as like nothing had happened, as though she hadn't just tossed away a sentimental present and publicly humiliated her stepdaughter. I left that house for what I vowed to myself would be the last time, slamming the door behind me. I immediately proceeded to my mother's house, where I eventually broke down and told her everything. All the years of abuse, deceit, and unfulfilled promises. In addition to her anger, Mom was devastated for me. She held me tight and murmured, "Oh, sweetheart, I didn't know. I'm so sorry you had to endure all of that by yourself." I had a strange mixture of comfort and despair as I sobbed in my mother's arms. I'm glad to be out of Sarah's toxic influence at last, but I'm sad for the connection I probably won't have with my father. My phone rang the day following Sarah's disastrous birthday. Dad was there. Even though I nearly didn't respond, I secretly hoped he would say, "Sorry," but at last he would see the reality. "Natalie?" he remarked in a firm tone. What caused your sudden departure from Sarah's party? She was quite angry. It made my blood boil. That was not the case. She put my present in the garbage and screamed at me in front of everyone. I was ejected by her. A pause occurred. Then Dad's voice returned, icy and angry. It's unbelievable that you would fabricate such falsehoods about Sarah. You're attempting to disparage my wife, but why? When you're prepared to apologize to Sarah, give me a call. The line died. Tears were running down my cheeks as I gazed at my phone. I understood then that I had indeed lost my father. The years that followed were a fog. I put a lot of effort into my studies, earned honors in college, and found a respectable career. I saw my dad a few times, but never in his house, always on a neutral location, like a park or cafe. Jason and I met at work around a year after I graduated. He was nice, witty, a few years older, and most importantly, he recognized me, actually noticed me, as a person deserving of love and respect, not as a burden or an annoyance. The 4 years went so quickly. After moving in together and adopting a cat named Muffin, Jason and I created a loving and humorous existence. Then one random Tuesday night, after dinner, as we were washing dishes, Jason turned to me and asked me to marry him. In an instant, I became engaged. As the initial thrill settled, planning a wedding became a reality. This returns us to the beginning of the narrative. Me. I was surrounded by wedding invites and debated whether or not to include Sarah. Ultimately, I sent an invitation to Dad alone. I was unable to bring myself to mention Sarah. Not after all that had transpired. I felt a mixture of resolution and melancholy as I closed the package. I wanted the past to no longer cast a shadow over the new chapter I was beginning in my life. My phone rang a week after I had sent out the invites. Dad was there. Anticipating the customary uncomfortable small chat, I responded. I received an earful of rage instead. "You dare?" Without even saying hello, he yelled. "How could you treat Sarah with such disrespect? She did not accept your invitation to your wedding, but I did. I couldn't help myself after everything she's done for you." I let out a quick, sour laugh that appeared to startle Dad into quiet. With a tone full of irony, I reiterated what she had done for me. "Are you listening to yourself now, Dad?" He said. "She reared you for years. She gave love and caring a lot of her heart." I eventually lost my composure and interrupted. "When did she ever show me affection or concern, Dad? Was it when she insisted that I wear used clothing while she purchased fancy clothing? Or the time she talked you out of getting me a vehicle for college? Yes, I am aware that she must have done it when she tossed away my birthday present and expelled me from her celebration." On the other end of the telephone, there was quiet. Then Dad remarked, "I'm sure you're exaggerating, Natalie," in a hushed tone. Sarah refused. "Wouldn't it? For years, Dad wouldn't treat me badly. Wouldn't always put her personal demands before of mine, as she did, and wouldn't make me feel uncomfortable in my own house. You also allowed her." Now my voice was trembling. "Years of repressed fury and hurt are exploding. Dad, you never defended me. Not once. You were constantly on her side. I always trusted her more than I did. How did that feel? Do you know? To be aware that your own dad would continually pick his wife above you? For what seemed like hours, there was stillness. Dad had a different voice when he eventually spoke. Smaller. In some way, Natalie, didn't know. I didn't intend to. God, please. What did I do?" On his end, I heard a stifled sob, and my heart tightened in spite of everything. With tears in his eyes, he went on, "I'm so sorry, Pumpkin. As a father, I have been awful. I prioritized Sarah. One disregarded your emotions. I let you down. Will you ever pardon me?" My own eyes began to fill up. For years, this was all I wanted to hear. However, I was unsure of how to respond now that the time had arrived. I paused, caught between caution and hope. "Dad, I'll give it some thought. Right now, that's all I can guarantee." Soon after, we hung up the phone, both of us emotionally spent for the next few weeks. Dad worked so hard. He inquired about the wedding arrangements, phoned frequently, and even offered to assist with the expenses. Gradually, slowly, I allowed myself to think that perhaps, just possibly, things might be different. Then my phone called once more the day before the wedding. My stomach fell as I heard my father's voice. "Natalie," his tone was harsh. "Sarah is here." A heart attack struck her. You are to blame for this, if she hadn't been left out. If you hadn't caused her this much anguish, it's unbelievable that you would do this to her. I am unable to attend your celebration. I hope all is well with you. The line died. I felt like I had been hit in the stomach as I stood there with my phone in hand. In a moment, I felt as though all of the progress and optimism I had given up were gone. I couldn't stop thinking as I sobbed in my fiancé's arms. Was this it? Would my connection with my father finish like this? On the prelude to what ought to be the most joyous day of my life? I woke up that morning with a range of feelings, including a deep grief at my father's absence as well as enthusiasm for the day. I tried to think positively while I sipped my coffee. It buzzed on my phone. Sarah's social media profile was the source of the notification. I clicked on it since I was so curious. I was infuriated by what I witnessed. Sarah appeared to be in excellent health, posting theatrical status entries about how she was recuperating from a horrible shock, how wounded she was, and how ungrateful I was. However, she was smiling and appeared to be as put together as ever in her pictures. My phone rang as I was looking through the posts. It was Carol, an old neighborhood acquaintance of Sarah's. Natalie, Carol is here. Look, you need to know something, but I shouldn't be calling. Sarah. She pretended to have a heart attack. I heard her boasting to some buddies about it. She took this action to ensure that your father would not attend your wedding. Honey, I'm so sorry. I hung up after thanking Carol. My head is spinning. A part of me wanted to contact Dad right now to call out Sarah's deception. Then I stopped, though. Why would it matter? He had already decided. He had repeatedly picked Sarah over me, believed her falsehoods, allow her to abuse me for years. The last nail in the coffin was this. I forced myself to forget about Dad and Sarah while I prepared for the wedding with my mother, my stepsister Lily, and my bridesmaids. I was determined not to let them spoil my day. However, one issue remained. Who will accompany me to the wedding? My voice was low as I asked. Lily and Mom looked at each other. Then Mom said something. Sweetheart, if you like, Robert would be happy to do it. You are like a daughter to him. You are aware. A lump formed in my throat. Robert. I was always made to feel welcome and loved by my stepfather, who had been more of a father to me than my own father, who had always been there for me. Really? I looked at Robert and inquired. He grinned broadly. I couldn't be more proud, Natalie. However, only if that is your desire. I came to a significant realization at that same time. Family is more than simply blood. It's about showing each other love, support, and presence. For years, Robert had always been that for me. Robert, I would adore that. I hugged him and whispered, thank you. Robert led me down the aisle during the lovely wedding. Jason was there, waiting for me. Love lighted up his face. I saw Lily, my mother, and all of our family members and friends sobbing and grinning. Tears of joy. I realized then that I had all the family I required in this place. I made the decision to share some wedding pictures online a few days after the wedding, just as Jason and I were getting ready to head out on our honeymoon. Almost instantly, one of the photos had a harsh comment underneath it. Sarah said, "Look at that, a stranger walking down the aisle while her own father wasn't even invited. Disgraceful." I gazed at the remark with a well-known rage rising within me. Then Jason's fingers touched my shoulder. "Are you all right now?" His eyes were worried as he inquired. I glanced at my spouse before turning back to the phone. Sarah's statement suddenly looked insignificant, trivial, and petty. "What do you know? I'm all right," I said, and I was surprised at how much I meant it. Without further thought, I'm actually more than okay. Sarah's account was banned. I hesitated for a second before blocking Dad's as well. I needed to permanently close that chapter of my life. Story 3. My name is Meryl, and I was raised in a typical family. The parents put a lot of effort into raising their 2 daughters. Yes, exactly. Sarah was my younger sister. She was born 5 years later than I was. And wow, she made a big impression right away. The decent child was me, diligently studied, got along with everyone. Don't ever make trouble. Sarah. She was a whole different matter. I recall this one instance when Sarah was 5 and I was 10. Sarah requested some sweets while we were in the grocery store with Mom. Mom firmly answered, "No, Sarah. At home, we have a plenty of munchies." Sarah's cheeks flushed. She threw herself on the ground and yelled, "But I want it now." Staring began. In an attempt to soothe Sarah, Mom appeared ashamed, but Sarah refused to move. She shouted louder and kicked. "I despise you. I never get anything from you." There were several occurrences like that. It didn't get better as we got older. Sarah started acting increasingly strangely. In a matter of seconds, she would go from laughing to screaming due to her extreme mood swings. Sarah was once taken to a psychologist by her parents. When they returned, I knew something was wrong. They seemed quite serious as they seated me down in the living room. My father got things started. "We must discuss Sarah with you," Mom added. According to the doctor, Sarah suffers from ADHD. It indicates that her brain functions somewhat differently. I nodded, not quite getting it. "Does she always act out because of this?" "Yes," Mom answered, "sweetie. We also need your assistance. Sarah now need more patience from us." I had no idea how that chat would shape the next 10 years of my life. Sarah became the center of attention. Me, her demands, her emotions, and her tantrums. I was supposed to be the elder sister who was understanding, always forgiving, always patient. Let me tell you, though, it wasn't simple. My parents' focus increasingly turned to Sarah as her behavior worsened. They began caving into her every request because they were terrified of offending her. I was left on my own in the interim. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't ignored, but I felt invisible in comparison to Sarah's unceasing attention. Occasionally, Sarah started acting in erratic ways as the years passed. She would assist with household chores, complete her schoolwork, and even show me some kindness in a week. However, it didn't last. When I was 16 years old, I recall coming home from school one afternoon to discover Sarah seated at the kitchen table, genuinely working on her maths assignment. Surprised, I responded, "Hey, Sarah, how are things going?" She grinned broadly as she glanced up. "I believe I'm finally understanding this algebraic material." I briefly had a ray of hope. Perhaps things were finally improving, but that optimism was dashed a week later. I heard a smash downstairs while I was studying in my room. Sarah was yelling at her mother. "I don't give a damn about dumb school. I can't be forced to leave." Then there was the sound of glass shattering. With a groan, I put on my headphones. My 17th birthday was just another day in our home. The situation worsened. Sarah appeared intent on making it hard for me to get ready for college applications. I was working on a test practice at my desk one evening. Then, through the walls, came ear-splitting music. Sarah was in her room when I barged in. "Can you refuse that?" She sneered. "I'm attempting to study Buju. Meryl needs to study, poor thing. I must listen to some music." "Take care of it!" I went to our parents in the hopes that they would step in, but I was dumbfounded by their answer. Mom remarked, "You know your sister struggles with self-control, honey. Be as understanding as you can." Dad gave a nod. "You might be able to study in the library." Sarah is the last person we want to annoy. It seemed unbelievable to me. However, what about me? Aren't my needs important? Mom gave me a hand pat. "They certainly do, my dear. However, Sarah's infirmity makes her life challenging. We must all be able to make accommodations." Furious, I returned to my room. Sarah was always the focus. Always. Sarah made a shocking revelation at supper a few weeks later. She declared, "I want to go live with Grandma." Dad and Mom looked at each other anxiously. "Honey, are you sure?" Mom inquired. "That is a significant shift." Sarah gave a nod. "I might come at any moment," Grandma replied. "I can do whatever I want with her." I hardly dared to hope and held my breath. My parents agreed, which surprised me. Perhaps everyone would benefit from a change of scenery. As Sarah packed her luggage, Dad said, I was cornered in the corridor by her. She screamed, "Don't think you're getting rid of me. You know, Grandma's loaded. She will give me all she wants and treat me completely. I'm set for life, while you'll be working your tail off in college." All I did was roll my eyes. "Anyhow, Sarah, simply leave." Our home remained quiet for the following 6 months. For the first time, I could concentrate on my schoolwork without being distracted. I was admitted to a public institution in a different city after acing my SATs. When I received the call, I had been attending college for a few months. Mom was there, and she sounded worn out. "Sarah is here. She has returned home. Your grandma?" She was no longer able to manage Sarah. claimed she was too rebellious, troublemaking all the time. She even accused us of being poor parents. She won't speak to any of us anymore. I closed my eyes with a mixture of sympathy and annoyance. I apologize, Mom. That must be difficult. It is, she said. We're attempting everything. Visiting a new psychologist with her, granting her her desires. We hope it will be beneficial. Then the worst part arrived. Meryl, about your college costs, my love. We are no longer able to assist you. All of our funds are being used to treat Sarah. Additionally, you will now have to provide for yourself while she expects it. I simply sat there trying to take it all in after we hung up. Sarah had once again turned my life upside down without my presence. However, I wasn't going to let this stop me. I phoned my grandma and got a part-time work at a nearby diner. When I described the problem to Grandma, she answered, "Of course I'll help you, dear. After everything you've been through, this is the least I can do." Grandma kept her promise and began sending me rent checks. During one of her visits, she even came to see me a couple of times. We had an intimate conversation. As she sipped her tea, she remarked, "You know, Meryl, Sarah makes me feel bad. I'm happy I can assist you, even though I believed I could manage her. My dear, you deserve it." Although difficult, the college years were also freeing. I had been lifted out of Sarah's shadow for the first time. I studied hard, made friends, and even began dating for a while. I chose to remain in the same place after graduating, after finding employment there. Having my own life apart from the tumult at home felt fantastic. Sarah was never present, although I did occasionally go see my parents. I once questioned my mother about her. Mom wrung her hands and muttered, "Oh, she's out with friends. She has been absent for several days." Dad said that we can hardly find her anymore, always with different boys, too. Was it John or is it Jake? And then there's that guy named Mike. I arched an eyebrow. "And this is okay to you?" Mom gave a pathetic shrug. "How can we proceed? She's simply that way." According to the psychologist, it's a component of her illness. To avoid expressing my true feelings, I bit my tongue. With Sarah, they were always making excuses. On a different occasion, I discovered Mom sobbing in the kitchen. "What's the matter?" Alarmed, I inquired. She dabbed at her eyes. "Sarah is here. This time she has been gone for 2 weeks. We have no idea who she is with or where she is. Despite everything, I experienced a twinge of concern. Have you contacted law enforcement?" Dad gave a head shake. "We did it once. She was upset with us for reporting her missing and returned on her own, claimed that we were attempting to manage her life." I was depressed and frustrated when I left that day. Nothing had changed, obviously. Their world still revolved around Sarah, regardless of how poorly she acted. I couldn't help but feel thankful for the life I had created for myself as I made my way back to my flat. It was mine, even though it wasn't flawless. When you're creating your own life, time flies. Before I realized it, I had been out of college for 3 years. I was establishing new friendships, settling into my profession, and at last felt somewhat stable. The phone call that caught me off guard then arrived. "Meryl, Mom is here. You won't believe what has transpired. Sarah is getting married." I almost dropped the phone. "Are you married, Sarah?" Mom's enthusiasm was palpable in her voice. "Indeed. Is it not unbelievable? The wedding is in 2 months. She just informed us." "I'm sure you'll arrive." Still in disbelief, I concurred. On the wedding day, I took a plane back home. Sarah revealed yet another shocking revelation as I assisted her in getting dressed. She added smugly, "Our honeymoon is being paid for by Mom and Dad. Bali for 2 weeks. All first class." I refrained from speaking. They were, of course. "They're being kind." I succeeded. Sarah grinned. "They owe me, then, after everything that I've endured." I wanted to tell her that she was mostly to blame for that nonsense, but I refrained. After all, it was the day of her wedding. I was shocked to finally meet Sarah's fiancé, Mark. He wasn't at all what I had anticipated. He was tall, good-looking, and at least 10 years Sarah's senior. There was a quiet certainty about him. "Meryl, it's great to meet you at last," he remarked, shaking my hand. "I learnt so much about you from Sarah." Wondering what exactly Sarah had informed him, I arched an eyebrow at her. The wedding went off without a hitch, which surprised me. Sarah seemed bright and, for the first time, truly joyful. I felt a ray of optimism as I saw them exchange vows. Perhaps this would be the moment that changed her life. Mom cornered me near the punch bowl during the reception. Meryl, isn't this fantastic? She exclaimed. Sarah has truly found her footing. Mark obviously loves her, as evidenced by his accomplishments. I sipped my drink and nodded. Mom, it's fantastic. I'm glad for her. Then the worst part arrived. Perhaps it's time for you to consider getting married as well, my dear. Your age isn't decreasing. My strike almost suffocated me. I'm just 26, Mom. She gave me an arm pat. I understand, my love. But take a look at Sarah. She's figured everything out now. The next day, as I took a plane back to my city, I couldn't get rid of a persistent sense. I sincerely hoped Sarah had found happiness in spite of everything. I did wonder, though, how long it would endure. Life continued. I poured myself into my job and tried not to think about the dynamics in my home. Then, a year or two after Sarah's wedding, an unforeseen circumstance occurred. Someone I met. Tom was his name, and we clicked right away. He was amusing, friendly, and paid attention to what I had to say. I thought for the first time that I had really met someone who accepted me for who I truly was. 2 years passed in a blur of dates, giggles, and growing affection. This was followed by Tom proposing to me on a cool fall evening. Yes, I replied. I have happy tears running down my cheeks. My life seemed to be coming together at last. It seemed like a dream to plan my wedding to Tom. It felt great to be the center of attention for once. I was committed to making it flawless, a day dedicated to us and our love. I invited my family, of course. My parents were still my parents in spite of everything. Sarah was still my sister as well. I hoped that perhaps, just possibly, this joyous occasion might unite us all. Sarah was by herself when she arrived at the location. A knot started to grow in my gut. Mark, where are you? I asked in a light-hearted manner. Sarah gave a shrug, was unable to attend. Is everything all right? I pushed. It's okay, she said. Can we let it go? Later, I heard Mom and Dad conversing in low voices, but I retreated since I didn't want to start a fight on my wedding day. I'm concerned for Mark and Sarah. They're arguing all the time now, according to Mom, but it's not her fault. She simply has a lot of energy. Mark needs to show more empathy. I shook my head and left. There are certain things that never change. It was a lovely ceremony. I had all of my dreams. As we exchanged vows, Tom's eyes glowed with affection. I also temporarily forgot about the family issues. Sarah, however, made sure she was not overlooked during the reception. She became inebriated, yelled, made love with Tom's pals, and even attempted to deliver a speech that swiftly turned into an angry tirade about how unjust her life had been. Determined not to let her spoil my day, I clenched my teeth and forced a grin. I made a solemn promise to myself as Tom, bless him, stayed by my side and supportively squeezed my hand as our humiliated parents pulled Sarah from the dance floor. I would never again allow her drama to take precedence over my life. For a time, I thought I may follow through on that promise. Other than the occasional phone contact, I didn't hear much from my family while Tom and I settled into married life. Then my phone rang about a year after our wedding. Mom was sobbing, and it was her. It's Sarah, Meryl. Mark abandoned her. In between tears, Mom clarified. After learning about Sarah's numerous extramarital encounters, Mark filed for divorce. She was heartbroken. Acting out worse than ever, they remarked. Mom cried, "We don't know what to do." According to the psychologist, she needs some time away and a change of environment in order to recover. Before she ever said anything, I knew what was going to happen. We were hoping, honey. Would Sarah be able to spend some time with you? Do you recall how we sent her to your grandmother's house to help you prepare for your tests? Now we need your assistance. I felt the typical burden of family responsibilities pressing down on me as I closed my eyes. At last, I said, "Let me speak with Tom." I hung up, then sat Tom down and gave him the rundown. His brow wrinkled in concern. He listened intently before agreeing. On a Tuesday, Sarah showed up looking like a shadow of the person she used to be. She hardly spoke above a whisper, and her eyes were swollen from sobbing. I had a real feeling of pity for my younger sister for the first time in years. I led her to the guest room and murmured softly, come on, let's settle you in." For the first few days, Tom was fantastic. Sarah's favorite dishes were prepared by him. To help her feel better, we talked to her casually and even took a day off work to go shopping for new outfits. However, no good act goes unpunished, as the adage goes. After Sarah had been there for about a week, I began to notice some differences. A lengthy look here, little things first. There was an unintentional bump into Tom. I attempted to dismiss it as my imagination going crazy. Then one day I found Sarah prancing about the living room in what could hardly be considered knickers when I got home from work. Tom appeared to be in great discomfort as he sat on the couch. "What are you doing?" Sarah cried. She spun around, pretending to be innocent. "Hello, Meryl. I was on the verge of showering." "Tom, isn't it rather hot today?" After mumbling something unintelligible, Tom virtually fled the room. I approached Sarah that evening. "Look, I understand that you're going through a difficult moment, but you must show respect for our marriage and our house." She gave an eye roll. "Meryl, please stop being such a prude. I was only attempting to relax. I let it go even though I briefly didn't buy it." A huge error. Sarah's actions got increasingly blatant over the course of the following few days. When Tom was there, she would bend down suggestively or inadvertently walk in on him in the restroom. I was at my breaking point. The day that broke the camel's back then arrived. With a migraine throbbing behind my eyes, I arrived home early from work and made my way to our flat. Sarah's voice was quite clear to me. "Meryl doesn't need to know, so hurry up, Tom. For once, don't you want to enjoy yourself?" Sarah was standing against my husband with her hands on his chest when I rushed in the door. Tom had a terrified expression. "Meryl!" he yelled, shoving Sarah aside. "It doesn't look like this." Sarah whirled around with a fake shock expression. "God, I feel so ashamed, Meryl." Tom just grabbed me as I stumbled. Red caught my eye. I whispered in a dangerously low voice, "Get out. Now pack your belongings and leave my house immediately." Anger twisted Sarah's face. "All right, in any case, I never intended to remain in this trash." "Meryl, you're pathetic. It's always so dull and cold." Tom was standing there, stunned, as she turned to face him. "You know, a hot piece like myself instead of Ice Queen Meryl would be so much better than her." Taking hold of her arm, I pulled her to the guest room. "I'll toss your belongings out the window if you don't pack in 5 minutes." Sarah was throwing insults as she rushed to get her belongings. I looked across at Tom. He seemed heartbroken. "I promise nothing happened, Meryl. I would never do it, even if she has been trying for days." I hugged him and interrupted him. "I'm sure I trust you. I really apologize for putting you through this." As we listened to Sarah's ongoing diatribe, we clutched each other. At last, she came out of the room with a suitcase. She spat, "You'll regret this. You too." We stood there in our now quiet apartment, and I felt a weight leave my shoulders as the door banged behind her. I came to a realization about the family I had spent my whole life attempting to satisfy and correct. They were no longer my biological family. It was Tom. And it was time for me to start prioritizing our marriage and our lives. The following morning, my phone rang before I had even completed my first cup of coffee. "Mom was the one. How could you?" I said, bracing myself. "Meryl?" Anger was strident in Mom's voice. "Ejecting your own sister from the house. I believed we did a better job raising you." I inhaled deeply. "It isn't what you think, Mom." However, she interrupted me. "Sarah filled us in on everything. How she and Tom were getting along, and you became envious. How you fabricated stories about her to support your decision to expel her. I'm so sad about you." My mouth fell open. "What? That's not accurate at all, Mom." Sarah made an attempt to woo Tom. She was flinging herself at him when she was out and about in her undies. She even made a sexual approach to him. A pause occurred. The voice of Dad then entered the queue. "Right now. Don't you think you're going overboard, Meryl? Although we are aware of Sarah's problems, she is family. Additionally, family members always support one another." Something broke inside of me. Support poured forth from years of bottled-up bitterness and frustration. Where was your help? Sarah was making my life miserable as I was attempting to study for college. When you stopped providing for me financially because you were too preoccupied with meeting Sarah's every need, where was your support? I'm done trying to understand and accommodate Sarah, something I've done my entire life. I'm done being the one in charge, the one who must constantly make sacrifices. You can now handle the repercussions since you brought her up this way. On the opposite end of the queue, there was a startled hush. Dad then spoke in a chilly tone. If you feel that way, perhaps it would be better if we didn't talk for a bit. When the rest of the family learns about this, don't be shocked if they share your sentiments. I gave a sour laugh. Is that meant to be dangerous? Tell them the version of events that makes you feel better about your shortcomings as a parent. I ended the call. As promised by my parents, the calls began to come in. Uncles, aunts, and cousins all expressed their dismay and sadness at my inhumane treatment of Sarah. In what way could you leave your sister when she was in need? Aunt Linda reprimanded me. This is a new low, but I always knew you were envious of Sarah. I got a message from cousin Mike. I made an effort to tell the first few the truth, but it soon became apparent that they had already made up their minds. The family had devoured the story Sarah and my parents had told about my brutality and envy. When I went on Facebook, it was the last straw. Sarah's post was there, in black and white, heartbroken. When I most needed her, my own sister abandoned me. Blood isn't always stronger than water, I suppose. Betrayal of family drama. Family relatives and former friends expressed their dissatisfaction with me and pity for Sarah in the comments section. I ran my finger across the keyboard. I could answer, give my version of events. However, what was the purpose? They had already decided on something. I started unfriending family members on social media and banning numbers with a sad heart. It was painful to break off relationships with folks I had known my whole life, but I felt I was making the correct decision as I turned to face Tom, who had supported me over this entire ordeal. In the weeks that followed my family's breakdown, I had the impression that I was moving in a fog. The anguish of being shunned by my own family members was intense and constant, but there was one light in the middle of the blackness. Meryl, my grandma. During one of our weekly phone chats, she remarked, "Dear, I want you to know you have my faith. You and Sarah are people I know. You made the correct decision." My eyes filled with tears. Regards, grandmother. That means so lot to me. You have no idea. She gave a little laugh. Yes, I believe I do. Now share your week with me. How is your amazing hubby doing? Then things continued as usual. Without the turmoil that had hampered us for so long, Tom and I were able to establish a calm routine. We pursued our jobs, traveled, and even began discussing the possibility of raising a family. Months went by, then a year. Via the grapevine, I learned bits and pieces of my family. After the divorce, Sarah had reportedly been unable to support herself and had returned to live with our parents. However, I ignored their ideas and concentrated on living my own life. Then my phone rang on a calm Sunday afternoon. I hadn't seen that figure in more than a year. Against my better judgment, my parents. "Hello, Meryl," the first said. My mum was the one. Tears clogged her voice. "We need your assistance, Meryl. I felt a familiar weight descend on my abdomen. What's the matter?" She said that Sarah had gotten out of control in between sobbing. She was hosting crazy parties, bringing strange guys home, and even threatening our parents physically when they attempted to step in. She ejected us. The voice of Meryl's father entered the queue. "Our lodging is a motel. We are unsure about what to do. Could you visit and speak with her? Perhaps she will pay attention to you." I closed my eyes and experienced a range of feelings. Anger, sympathy, and exasperation. However, I felt nothing most of the time. "No," I answered softly. "I am unable to." Mom began, though, Meryl. I interrupted her. "No, Mother, I'm finished. I've spent my entire life apologizing for Sarah's actions and cleaning up her mess. And you all abandoned me when I at last defended my rights. This is now your issue. She was reared by you. She was made possible by you. You must now face the repercussions." I hung up before they could answer. After that, I blocked their phones with a feeling of closure. After a short while, Tom discovered me looking into space on the couch. "Is everything all right?" His voice was worried as he inquired. I grinned as I gazed up at him. Really grinned. "You are aware of it." I believe that everything is genuinely fine for the first time in my life. I had a wave of calm as we sat there. I had lost my birth family, to be sure, but I had acquired a lot more. I rocked in my buddy, Tom. My grandma adored me without conditions. Most significantly, I was stronger and more confident than I had ever been. I gave my grandma a call the next day. Would you be interested in spending some time with me, Grandma? Your professional eye would be helpful to Tom and me as we consider redoing the guest room. Her happiness was evident over the phone. I'd love to, Meryl. What time should I arrive? I came to a realization while I was wrapping up preparations for my grandmother's arrival. Family should be like this. People who make you happy, love you, and support you.